Wars are supposed to begin over territory, power, religion, or resources. Sometimes they do, but history also remembers conflicts whose triggers sound like a bad argument overheard at a bar. An ear, a pastry bill, a dead pig, a wooden bucket, even a dog that wandered across the wrong border. The names are funny. The consequences were not, because the ridiculous object was rarely the real cause. It was usually the match. Behind it stood imperial ambition, old hatreds, trade routes, wounded pride, and leaders who had already decided that violence was useful. Still, every war needs a story simple enough to repeat, and these 10 stories were absurd enough to survive for centuries. First, Britain and Spain went to war in 1739 over what became the most famous body part in naval history, the ear of Captain Robert Jenkins. 8 years earlier, Jenkins had been sailing in the Caribbean when Spanish Coast Guards stopped his ship and searched it for contraband. According to his later testimony, a Spanish officer cut off his ear and told him to carry it back to his king. By the time Jenkins appeared before the British Parliament, the ear had become political theater. Some accounts claimed he even displayed it in a jar. Members of Parliament were furious. Newspapers were furious. The public was furious. And Britain declared war on Spain. The conflict became known as the War of Jenkins Ear, a name that made it sound as though Europe had mobilized over a barbershop accident. But the ear was only the cleanest slogan available. Britain and Spain had been fighting over colonial trade, smuggling, shipping routes, and control of the Caribbean for years. The war lasted until 1748. Thousands died from combat, disease, and disastrous expeditions, including Britain's failed attack on Cartagena de Indias. An ear became a flag. Empires did the rest. Second, France found a way to turn an unpaid dessert bill into artillery fire. In the 1830s, Mexico was politically unstable, financially exhausted, and full of foreign merchants demanding compensation for property damage during years of unrest. One of those merchants was a French pastry cook named Monsieur Remontel. His bakery near Mexico City had allegedly been damaged by Mexican officers. Remontel demanded compensation. The amount he claimed was enormous for a pastry shop. 60,000 pesos. France gathered other financial complaints, added them together, and demanded roughly 600,000 pesos from Mexico. Mexico refused, so in 1838 France sent warships to blockade Mexican ports and bombard the fortress of San Juan de Ulua near Veracruz. French troops occupied Veracruz. Mexico's economy suffered. Men died. The conflict became known as the Pastry War. No one actually believed croissants were worth a naval assault. France wanted leverage, compensation, and greater commercial influence in Mexico. But the bakery was the perfect symbol. It was specific. It was ridiculous. And it made an imperial power look as if it had gone to war, because someone refused to pay for damaged pastries. The bill was eventually settled through British mediation. The pastries, presumably, were not third. Medieval Italy gave history the War of the Bucket. In 1325, the rival city-states of Bologna and Modena fought the Battle of Zappolino. The popular version says Modenese soldiers raided Bologna, stole a wooden bucket from a well, and Bologna marched to war to get it back. The bucket still exists as a symbol of the feud. It is displayed in Modena, but the true story is less silly and more dangerous. Bologna supported the Guelph faction, generally aligned with the papacy. Modena supported the Ghibellines, generally aligned with the Holy Roman Emperor. Their cities had spent generations trapped in northern Italy's larger struggle for power. The bucket was not the cause. It was a trophy, yet it became the detail everyone remembered because a wooden bucket is much easier to understand than the political chaos of medieval Italy. Thousands of men fought. Modena won. Bologna lost territory and prestige. And somewhere in the middle of all that bloodshed, a bucket became more famous than the people who died. History has a cruel sense of proportion. Fourth, the Dutch and the Austrians nearly went to war over a kettle. In 1784, Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II wanted to reopen the Scheldt River to international shipping. The river led toward Antwerp, but the Dutch Republic controlled its mouth and had kept it closed for more than a century. Joseph sent a ship called the Le Louis toward the river. Dutch forces fired a cannonball. The cannonball did not sink the ship. It did not destroy its mast. It reportedly hit a soup kettle on deck. That was the entire military highlight. The incident became known as the Kettle War, because one shot had apparently damaged nothing more strategically important than cookware. Austria made threats. The Dutch mobilized. Europe watched two states argue over navigation rights with the energy of neighbors fighting over a driveway. But the river mattered. Trade mattered. Antwerp mattered. The kettle simply made the conflict impossible to take seriously. No great battle followed. Diplomacy produced the Treaty of Fontainebleau in 1785. A cannonball hit a kettle. Europe held its breath. Fifth, the United States and Britain almost began a real war because of one hungry pig. In 1859, the San Juan Island sat between Vancouver Island and the American mainland. Both the United States and Britain claimed them. The border had been written vaguely enough that each side believed the islands belonged to them. Then an American settler named Lyman Cutler found a pig rooting through his garden and eating his potatoes. The pig belonged to the British-owned Hudson's Bay Company. Cutler shot it. A British official demanded compensation. Cutler reportedly offered $10. The owner wanted $100. Arguments followed. Officials became involved. Soldiers arrived, then more soldiers arrived. The United States sent troops under Captain George Pickett. Britain sent warships and Marines. At one point, hundreds of American soldiers faced British naval power over a dead pig and a disputed island. No human being died in the Pig War. The pig was the only confirmed casualty. For 12 years, the United States and Britain jointly occupied the islands. In 1872, Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany was asked to arbitrate. He awarded the San Juan Islands to the United States. The garden survived. The pig did not. Sixth, the British Empire triggered a war in 1900 by demanding an object it did not understand. The object was the Golden Stool of the Asante people in what is now Ghana. It was not furniture. It was not merely a throne. The Golden Stool represented the soul, authority, and unity of the Asante nation. British officials had already exiled the Asante king, Prempeh I. Then Governor Frederick Hodgson entered Kumasi and demanded to know where the Golden Stool was. He reportedly expected to sit on it. That demand was catastrophic. To British colonial officials, it may have looked like a demand for a royal symbol. To the Asante, it was a demand for submission at the deepest possible level. The stool was hidden. Queen Mother Ya Asantewa rallied resistance. The War of the Golden Stool began. British forces were besieged in Kumasi. Relief columns fought through the region. The British eventually defeated the uprising and formally annexed Asante territory. Ya Asantewa was captured and exiled, but the British never captured the Golden Stool during the war. They gained the territory. They failed to take the symbol. Savant, Greece, and Bulgaria fought in 1925 after a dog crossed a border. The border near Petrich was tense. Greece and Bulgaria had fought before. Both states carried memories of the Balkan Wars and the First World War. Soldiers on the frontier were armed, suspicious, and waiting for an excuse. Then, according to the most repeated version, a Greek soldier's dog ran across the border into Bulgaria. The soldier chased it. A Bulgarian sentry shot him. That single death triggered a diplomatic crisis. Greece demanded an apology and compensation. Bulgaria resisted. Greek troops crossed the border and occupied territory around Petrich. The League of Nations stepped in. It ordered Greece to withdraw and pay compensation. Greece complied. The fighting lasted barely over a week. Estimates of the dead vary, but dozens of people were killed. It became known as the War of the Stray Dog. A dog crossed an invisible line. Men with rifles turned it into a national emergency. Eighth, one of the most famous wars in Central American history was named after soccer. That does not mean soccer caused it. In 1969, El Salvador and Honduras played a series of World Cup qualifying matches. The games were explosive. Riots broke out. Fans attacked one another. Newspapers on both sides turned the matches into patriotic warfare. Then relations collapsed. For years, Salvadoran migrants had moved into Honduras where land was scarce and political pressure was rising. Honduras began expelling Salvadoran families. Thousands lost homes and property. El Salvador accused Honduras of persecution. Honduras accused El Salvador of interference. On July 14, 1969, El Salvador launched an invasion. The war lasted about 100 hours. Around 2,000 people were killed, and thousands more were displaced. The Organization of American States helped force a ceasefire. The football war became the name everyone remembered because it sounded absurd. Two countries going to war after a soccer match. But the stadium riots were only the spark. The real fuel was land, migration, poverty, nationalism, and governments willing to turn public anger into military action. The scoreboard did not start the war. It only made the crowd ready for it. Ninth, Iceland and Britain fought several wars over fish. The Cod Wars were not one conflict but a series of confrontations between 1958 and 1976. Iceland wanted to expand the fishing zone around its coast. Britain wanted its trawlers to keep fishing there. That was the issue. Cod. British fishing communities depended on access to the North Atlantic. Iceland depended even more heavily on its fisheries. So Iceland extended its territorial fishing limits. Britain sent naval vessels to protect trawlers. Icelandic Coast Guard ships cut fishing nets. British frigates rammed or shadowed Icelandic patrol boats. No one declared a full-scale war. No armies invaded, but warships faced each other over fish. The dispute became serious enough that Iceland threatened to leave NATO and close a key base during the Cold War. That made the cod suddenly matter to Washington, London, and Moscow. Britain eventually accepted Iceland's expanded fishing zone. The lesson was simple. A fish is never just a fish when an economy depends on it. 10th, France and Brazil nearly fought over lobsters. In the early 1960s, French fishing vessels began catching spiny lobsters off Brazil's northeastern coast. Brazil claimed the lobsters belonged to its continental shelf. France argued that lobsters moved through the water like fish, which meant French vessels could catch them in international waters. The debate became surreal. Brazilian officials argued that lobsters crawled on the seabed, so they were part of the continental shelf. The French counter-argument was essentially that lobsters swam, therefore they were fish. French President Charles de Gaulle was later associated with the joke that Brazil's logic might also make chickens birds of the air, or something close to it. The exact phrasing varies. The diplomatic humiliation did not. Brazil sent naval ships. France sent a destroyer and other vessels toward the region. For a moment, two countries appeared ready to escalate a military crisis over crustaceans. Eventually, diplomacy cooled the situation. Agreements regulated fishing rights. No shots were fired. But somewhere in the Atlantic, warships had prepared to defend competing theories about how a lobster moves. That is the real pattern behind these wars. The stupid reason is usually the part history can repeat in one sentence. The ear, the pastry, the bucket, the pig, the dog, the fish, the lobster. But beneath every absurd trigger sat something much older and much more serious. Power, money, fear, pride, and leaders who believed the cost would be paid by someone else. The object made the war memorable. The people made it possible.